Hi everybody, it's me, Willow, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am here once again with another film review for all of you guys. Before I get to that, just want to promote my Letterboxd, my TikTok, and my awards expert account. You can find me on all of those social medias at Willow D Steele. I appreciate my community growing, so check me out on those platforms. Also, while you're at it, hit the subscribe button and post notification button because I post film reviews and awards predictions multiple times a week, so I don't want you to miss out. All right, let's dive into my review for After the Hunt, directed by Luca Guadagnino. If you can tell from the background, I'm a big Luca Guadagnino fan. I really have been following him for quite some time. I feel like it's been almost 10 years now. I love him. Honestly, he's one of my favorite directors. I'm so grateful that one of the most like diverse and willing to, go out there with his directing is, during my time, I feel like we actually have quite a few of these like passionate auteur directors, and I definitely think Luca falls into that category. I feel like none of his films are exactly alike. I definitely think Bones and All is one of my top favorites from him. He's a really hard director to rate because all of his films are so different and I like them all so much in various different ways. And often after a first watch, I will grow to love the film over time, and I think After the Hunt is going to be exactly like that. With Challengers, I gave it a 4 after the first watch, and as it's grown over time, over a year and a half since the film's been out, and I've given it several re-watches, I would definitely say it's on the trajectory of a 5-star film now for me. I love Challengers. I think it's so fantastic. Same with Bones and All. The first time I watched it, I would also say it was like a 4-star film, and now I would 100% say it's a 5-star film. I think his film A Bigger Splash and Suspiria, his miniseries We Are Who We Are, his film Call Me By Your Name, his film Queer. Oh my goodness, he is such a brilliant filmmaker, and I'm just so grateful to be alive while he's making films. And After the Hunt, I love it almost just as much as all of his other films. I've been hearing so much negative press about it. It's got a Rotten Tomatoes score. I'm pretty sure the Metacritic score was pretty low as well. It didn't get great reception out of the film festival circuit, and I was worried about this one. Like, I was like, I'm not sure, guys. People are not loving it, but honestly, I shouldn't have been surprised because last year with Queer, people were also kind of off about it. Not a lot of people loved it, and I think that film is truly like one of his masterpieces. I was so broken after that film. I just think it's truly a beautiful piece of art, um, an amazing adaptation, and I think After the Hunt is a really smart and sophisticated narrative piece. I think Luca is really, getting grasp on his filmmaking. He's been in the biz for quite a long time, and he's at this point where, he knows what he's doing. He can be experimental, he can try something a little bit different, and if it doesn't work with the masses, that's okay. His vision still came to life, and he was able to get across what he wanted to say. And I truly do think in maybe even a year, I don't know. I think right now it's a really difficult time for this type of narrative, questioning Me Too when we are regressing back in the political climate. I think it's very interesting that this film is It doesn't 100% say when it's taking place, but it does kind of seem like it's either in the end of the first Trump administration or the beginning of the Biden administration. And then at the end of the film, we are into Trump's second presidency. And I think it's so smart to see that language and culture shift in the epilogue, and how Alma, Julia Roberts' character, was villainized from one clip 5 years previously, and then 5 years later in the epilogue she has gained so much, and her narrative in 5 years has completely shifted, and everything she thought she wouldn't have been able to achieve, she is able to achieve at the end. Like, I really do think Luca is telling us so much with this narrative, and we don't like that he is pushing this in our faces. And I agree with what Alma says in the film, that not everything is made to make us comfortable. And I think this film is a prime example of that. Film and cinema is not always comfortable. And sometimes it's there to open our eyes, it's there to teach us things, to examine things. I don't know if this film is necessarily teaching us anything, but I definitely think it's examining the culture and what we think is acceptable and who gets passes in society. I think not only is this an interesting cultural narrative, but it's also like socially political, cultural narrative, but it's also a really interesting class narrative. I find the words that are used specifically against Ayo's character Maggie, and then also Andrew Garfield's character Hank, are so specific and are used like directly on purpose. Io's character is a black queer PhD student. That's very, important to her character, big identifier. It's used in the language so often in the film to identify Maggie. And then we have Alma, and the things that are used to describe her are cold and unapproachable. Nothing actually really about her descriptor, her appearance, her socioeconomic status, nothing like that. So I just found it very interesting, that different distinctions between the characters. And we also talk specifically about Maggie and how she comes from a very rich family, and that her family has a lot of sway at Yale, and they bought a lot of the campus, and it seems like everybody, on the staff is believing that Maggie has been handed a lot to her and she's been able to breeze through life. And with Andrew Garfield's character, he is described as coming from nothing. He worked 3 jobs. He was kind of picked by Alma's professor as one of these star pupils that she really wanted to mold into her own. And it's mentioned that when they would go out to get dinner or drinks when he was in school, she would always pick up the tab because he was broke. And now he's a professor, and he's still not like super well off compared to all of these privileged high class students that are going to Yale. So I just really think, that class dynamic is extremely interesting. Also, when it comes to like Alma's character and the things that she experienced growing up, and how the difference between feminism and what was acceptable for women to come forward with at different times in society, and the ramifications that, either silence or speaking out at different generations will give you. And when, younger generations confide in older generations that they think are, supportive and very uplifting of women, they don't have that reaction or support that my generation specifically would assume that you would come with, is very interesting. Like, I will never forget, growing up in high school, and I had somebody in my life who went through, a kind of similar essay experience, and they told me, and I was very sympathetic. We were the same age, but then when I told somebody about the experience from an older generation, I would say maybe like 2 generations older than me, they had the complete opposite reaction. They were very victim blaming and wanting to understand what that person was doing in the situation that like led to the moment. And I don't know if that's necessarily what Alma does, but the fact that she's so close to Hank and obviously is romantically involved with him in, you know, boundaries that are completely being crossed professionally, romantically, just all like so many different ways. You can tell that Alma has no grip on her life, and she reacts negatively because that is what she was given growing up. She was told growing up that she loved this man. She if you loved a man when you were younger and something happened to you, it was your fault. Like, that's just how it was. And like, being, somebody under 25, a younger, Gen Z population, I definitely have a disconnect from that. And I just find it so interesting to navigate and examine that whole feminist lens of the different disconnect of the generations and the Me Too, and how it's affected, that generation, an older generation, Julia Roberts, and how I was in high school, when the Me Too movement came forward and all of these women were open and public about what happened to them. That doesn't mean they didn't face scrutiny and so many people saying that they lied and it wasn't true. Exactly, what happens to Maggie in this film. But because of the Me Too movement and these women coming forward, and I was in such a young, impressionable image, it definitely showed a lot of power and strength. And, I think it taught my generation, Gen Z, that we should, hold this power and be able to be open and say that we were assaulted and violated, and it's not okay, and it's not imaginary, and it's not something that we should push down and gaslight ourselves into believing that it was our fault. And we had romantic feelings for these people, and maybe we were friendly with them and we led them on. No, it was them all along. And I think, near the end, when we have kind of this very abrasive moment between Hank and Alma at her second apartment, there's this really intense scene that just builds between them. And I think that really does reveal so much about the situation and how there are so many red herrings, like the class, the race, the generation, all of these things of being like Chloe Sevigny's conversation that she has with Julia Robert and how they're talking about, oh, I believe her, but this generation, they just have everything handed to them, and one bad thing happens to them, and they're all up in arms and say everything should stop, and we should have, vengeance and reformative justice, and like, okay, like, should we not? Like, I just find it so interesting, these conversations between these older generations, also the younger generation. I really liked having the conversation between Maggie and Sky. I believe that's what Maggie's partner's name is, and they have like two really distinct conversations between them, and Sky later comes up in like this protest scene between Alma and like the younger generation, and how we view everything just so distinctly differently from the older generation, and even like the gender divide as well. Michael Stahlberg's character and Hank's, you know, their demeanor between the female characters in their lives. Like, it's very obvious that Michael's character, Frederick, is threatened by his wife Alma, and how like sophisticated and academically inclined she is, and it's very obvious that Frederick is also very, academically forward as well. He seems very, articulate with food and with music, specifically jazz. He seems to be super knowledgeable, but he makes a comment that Alma has no interest in his life or his work. She never asks about him, and obviously he holds grudges against his wife, and he just stays, kind of stationary. And when he just doesn't get involved in these academic conversations, he pouts and throws tantrums. Very similar with Hank. He acts all high and mighty, throws around all these theologies and Nietzsche conversations, and in the end, like, he is very much this like toddler, cannot get his thoughts processed, very volatile, and dangerous. So, like, scary. I found his character to be scary, and give props to Andrew Garfield's character for that, because I think his acting is just superb. I love seeing him in this like hideous, evil role. Like, I have not seen him in something like this in like a really long time, so it's nice to see him in more of an evil, villainous role compared to like the nice boy next door that we get to see him so often in. So I really did love the performances. I just think these are top notch. Like, again, like, I just don't understand people not enjoying the film. Like, I heard a lot of people thinking it was very boring. They thought it was a lot of academic jumble, and okay, like, I guess I can kind of understand maybe a little bit of some people's disdain, but I was hooked. Like, I really did not have like a moment where I was like, let me check my watch. Is this going to be over soon? I really did enjoy myself. I thought all the scenes were very catching. I was grasping to learn more. I wanted to unveil what was going on, in the depths of the souls of these characters, specifically Alma, and all of this turmoil that is going on with her. I really do love going to her second apartment and having the camera like linger on her hands and on her napping. I think it's really interesting to see how it's obvious that she's dealing with like substance abuse, and she's dealing with like ulcers and this pain physical pain, but also, emotional pain that she's been dealing with since she was like 15 years old. We get to dive into that and the psychology of that a bit near the end of the film. I also think Maggie's character is just extremely interesting, and how you're really, caught in the middle, and you have no evidence, just her word, and it's, are you going to believe her, or are you going to fall into this rhetoric of she's making it up for clout, she's a student who is plagiarizing, so she is trying to make all of this up so she can still have like this privileged spot in society and at the school, and she can just ruin people's lives. Very misogynistic, narrative. And I think Luca, he really dives in there and takes Nora Garrett's script and dives deep. And that's what I've been asking for, for 2025, is people digging deep. And I really do think this film is executed fantastic. I love the ending. I think it's so interesting, like I said at the beginning, to see this 5 year jump, specifically with the political and cultural natures of that 5 years kind of being eluded from the Biden Trump administrations, and seeing how, like, they mention how Yale is getting rid of like their DEI programs, and all of this stuff that's starting to come up in 2025, and how when Alma, we assume she's going to, become the victim and lose everything in this situation because she was the villain, but in the end, she's rewarded. So I really find it interesting. I think it's spot on for 2025, and I think it's just one of these films that is really hard to grasp with the political nature that's going on right now. Like, it's obvious, like, this is a difficult movie to watch. It's, if you are not interested in academia and diving deep in the feminist lens, then this one's not going to be for you. And I think a lot of this is flying over people's heads, but I really do think this is a solid film. I think it's a solid screenplay, solid performances. I really do think Luca has some interesting direction. I really don't think this looks like any of his others films. I have not seen The Protagonist or This Is Love. Those are the only two films I haven't seen of his first two films, actually. So I'm interested to watch those ones and see specifically This Is Love, because I think it has a similar atmospheric lens compared to all of his other films. Because my one complaint would be that this film is kind of dreb. I don't love how, like, dry and cold the film is, and specifically with like the saturation, but I think that's also brilliant because, like, at the end we get to see this specific like brutalist structure, and I'm like, oh, he did it all on purpose to show like the concrete. And even like Julia's second apartment, like at the wharf, it's also very like cold and kind of isolated. And I think that's what we are made to feel about this film, that it is cold. And from such a dynamic and explosive, explorative filmmaker like Luca, to have a very, you know, sepia kind of toned film is, shocking. And like, oh, what did he do? Something different, So that would be my only thing. I wish maybe he would have tried something a little bit different with the visual aspect, because I do love when we get more color and feeling and emotion. But I think he did all of that on purpose, like with the brutalist and coldness. I really did love it by the end. And specifically with like the last diner scene, like, I just really do love it. I really do love the music. I've heard some complaints of how people don't love the mixing of the film, and I could hear it in some scenes where I could see some people's complaints, but I really did like it. I thought the mixing was interesting. I liked that when we were in the college bars, we were in the college bars, it was difficult to hear what some of our protagonists were saying. I found that very interesting. I thought it showed the culture of what these bars are like and how the professors are just going to get, like, how is that, like, really, like, okay? You're just walking in to see your students, like, drunk, and or your professor drunk. Like, it's just very intriguing, and I loved how we got some of that use of diegetic sound. There's actually a lot of different uses of the diegetic sound with Michael's character, and like I said, he's very interested in music, and Frederick will play a couple different, like, jazz albums or a little bit more like alternative rock music. And I really do love how, like, Julia is waking up from a hangover and she's walking into the kitchen and the music just gets louder and louder and louder, and when she comes in it's this huge crescendo, and obviously it's killing her headache and we can feel that as the audience. Or there's like a scene where Alma is trying to maybe like meditate to this Miles Davis song, and she's getting interrupted by somebody calling her phone, and I thought that was super interesting. So I really do love the use of like the jazz and all the different diegetic sound. Gotta give props to Trent and Atticus on that. Really do love this different use. I don't know if it's like, as memorable as Challengers or even like Queer. Um, but I do really like the different uses of the diegetic sound, and I really do think that is something to point out and is a big positive from my point of view. Another complaint I would have is that Chloe Sevigny is not used as hardly as much as I'd like her to be. Same goes with Michael. Both of their characters really stood out to me. I love both of them. They are in the Luca Guadagnino like cinematic universe. They've been in several of his other works before, and both of them are top-notch actors, and I really do like what they're doing with their roles. I think Michael is a standout in the film. I really do like Chloe as well. She just isn't given as much to work with, but I do think there are a couple scenes with her, and there's this one scene with her and Julia Roberts where Julia is in her office all by herself, and then Chloe comes in and is like, "Oh, like, good to see you. Like, we can have our meeting." And Julia's like, "Oh, actually, I have to go." And like they didn't, it was super funny. Like I laughed out loud. It was so good. So, really great. Like I don't know what more to say about the film because I really did like it. I think the costumes really interesting. I like how like smug and like just like gross that they made Hank's character. I really loved like all the unbuttoned shirts that he had, and one scene near the end where he's like in the bed and he's kind of like half dressed. It's just like, we know you are a slime ball. I had some professors like you in university, and I am glad I got away from them. And it's just like crazy, like what costumes will do. And I think this is like mentioned in the film how Alma and Maggie have very similar attire, and how like Maggie is trying to maybe become Alma, and we're like, does she want to be Alma or does she want to be with Alma? And like another red herring with like that whole like, oh, she's in love with me. Like, it's just so interesting. I really do like the film. I would probably give it like a 4.5, I think. I was kind of debating 4, 4.5, but I really did enjoy it. like I said, only downfalls is I really wish it was a little bit more cinematically appealing. It is quite dark in some of the scenes, and I was worried I was going to have issues with like Io being lit. And there was like one scene at the beginning when she is like in the stairwell. I found it just a little bit hard to see her, and black actors in the dark, like they have to be lit properly. And whenever I see actors with a darker complexion on screen and they're not lit properly, it's a really big pet peeve of mine because we're in 2025. Like, let's get with the program, and it's not hard to light these individuals properly. But it was also an issue with like Julia Roberts and Michael's character. There was a couple scenes, and also Andrew Garfield, where we were in the dark and we were in shadow, and I think Luca was using it as well for kind of like the eeriness, because there was a couple cinematic scenes where we were like right up in our face using close-up shots that were super effective, really added to like this tension and the anxiety, feeling super uncomfortable in my seat. And I feel like maybe those darker scenes were trying to add to that, to try and feel like, okay, we're in the dark. And if we're saying these things in the dark, maybe they're safe in the dark. Maybe we don't have to admit in the light that these things are actually happening. These things are true. We are actually not good people. And so, when I look at it from that perspective, I do find it interesting. But dark movies are always just a pet peeve of mine. So the darkness of the film and the overall like lack of cinematic like pizzazz were like criticisms, and I do wish um Chloe Sevigny and even Andrew Garfield to an extent were used more in the film. They do get some great scenes, but I would have loved if they were a little bit more of part of the ensemble rather than side characters. As I just mentioned, I really did enjoy Luca's different kind of take on his like focusing on one like frame. Like like he's done that with Call Me by Your Name. He's also done it in Bones and All. He'll kind of like linger on one image, one frame for like a few moments, and you kind of grab some information, some levity. And I do think it's interesting how he does that in this film, specifically like on hands. He will show us a lot of hands actually, like on stomachs, on people's backs when we're embracing, on desks when we're driving. I really do like the different use of hands. I also think there's lots of intimate scenes of sleeping, specifically with Alma's character. We're often with her in these vulnerable moments, and we discuss that with Frederick's character and how, she looks so young and vulnerable when she's sleeping, and when she's awake, she's kind of like unapproachable and cold. So I'd really like that juxtaposition and how Luca's able to frame that. This one big blow up scene between Hank and Alma, like in the school, like I mentioned with the close-ups, really adds to the tension in the film. So I really do love what Luca was going for in his visual language that he was bringing to the film. I really just love seeing how he grows as a director, and I think these are fantastic performances. I know it's not really hitting for a lot of people, so I don't know if maybe it's going to gain a little bit more momentum and we will see it on the awards circuit, but honestly, I would give this like a screenplay nomination because I do think it's a really strong analyzation of our culture and society right now, specifically in the West, with the Me Too movement, with the second Trump administration. Really, really interesting, like in a post Roe v. Wade world. I really do love this film, and in 5 more years, I'll be really interested to look back and rewatch this film and see if I like it more or if I like it less. I think this will be a very interesting film to analyze in the future. Like, even analyzing it today is extremely interesting to me. But I really do like the performances from Julia Roberts. I think Ayo gives a great supporting performance as well. Same with Andrew Garfield. He gives a really phenomenal performance and, like, blow up scene. I really do love him in that scene. He's just like so dynamic and transformative, and somebody that I've never seen before comes out there. I also think Michael is just stunning. I think he has some very interesting lines that make us like think and really do give us, things to chew on after we leave. So I would say this is awards nomination worthy, and I'm going to be disappointed if Luca Guadagnino's film once again is snubbed like it was last year with Challengers and Queer. But let me know what you guys think of After the Hunt in the comments below. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts, even if it's, not aligned with mine. If you're a little bit more negative leaning on this film, let me know. Let's have a conversation started down below in the comments. If you enjoyed my review, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button and post notification button. All of this interaction really does help get me, on the pages of other like minded folks. So, thank you so much for all of the interaction and engagement. I really do appreciate seeing my, film community grow here on TikTok and on Letterboxd, Awards Expert, and TikTok. Thank you so much for growing it with me. I really do appreciate seeing you guys here every single week. So, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.